of that?
I don't think since the beginning of the Cold War, let's go back to 1947 or 48, I don't think we've stopped fighting. I just think we're fighting wars of different kinds. So I think this idea of kinetic warfare is less frequent, especially among the major powers. So Israel and Iran is an example of one of the last few gasps of kinetic warfare. But if you look at the United States and China, United States and Russia, the European powers, NATO, it's less kinetic than it is more through use of information, through technology, through cyber warfare.
What's kinetic?
So kinetic is, when I refer to kinetic, I mean using actual physical means, bombs, missiles, tanks, soldiers, that type of thing. And it's less now, and it's more now moving towards other forms where you can now destabilize a government or a system of government or a society using a server farm and 20 people sitting in a room thousands of miles away. And you don't necessarily need weapons to do that, where information becomes weaponized, where digital tools become weaponized. And that's far different than anything we saw in the 20th century. So I think that the rise of the internet in the beginning late 1990s through the 2000s, we've seen now this become industrialized at scale. And I think the threat comes now from the ability of countries and regimes to destabilize and interfere with others in a way that they simply couldn't do years ago. And now you don't even need to fund it massively to do that. It's basically warfare on the cheap.
Mm-hmm. Before we started recording, I expressed to you that there's a certain tension in the world right now.
Yeah.
Where's that coming from and why, in your perspective?
One of the things that's been evident to us, especially since the 2016 elections here in the United States, is this idea that we live in a post-truth society. And with so much information available to everybody on every platform, through every means and channel, there's now no monopoly on objective truth or fact. And so with that comes the ability to distort, to propagandize, to mislead, to misinform. And people do this to aggregate power, to bring power to themselves. And so when we live in a world where everyone thinks they know everything or they're afraid that they don't know enough, you have a constant state of tension and anxiety. And people are uncertain about their place in society. There's a wealth gap comes into play. And with that, you feel like there's threats or perceived threats or conspiracies around every corner. And this is why I think lies and misinformation and conspiracy theories take hold in times like this, when people are anxious, frightened, uncertain about their place in society, about what's coming next. And that puts us in a very tense state. And very clever people can take advantage of that and manipulate to their benefit. So that, I think, explains why we feel this tension that we do.
The tension is clearly resulting in real changes, because those stats I read out at the start, where there's more nations in conflict now, there's more military funding, more people think we're on the verge of something pretty catastrophic than any time in the last couple of decades. That information, which is causing attention, is then having a downstream impact, which is conflict is breaking out.
I don't say it's upstream. You have polarization happening within societies, especially in Western societies, where there is no monopoly on the truth or news or information. You have the fragmentation of, let's say, major news sources. Traditionally, you have a few very respected, trusted sources and authorities or figureheads that people would turn to. We don't have that anymore. It's now been diluted to the point that it is almost meaningless. And so you see the social media has contributed to this. And so with that, these divisions, these schisms in society have made major industrial powers like the United States, like let's say the Europeans, more vulnerable to manipulation than ever before. So now if you're an adversary like Russia or China, Iran, North Korea, you can take advantage of the ability to tap into this polarization and play people off against one another, cause division. And that destabilizes democratic societies. And then that in turn enables these countries like Russia and China and others to have more leverage and more influence in the developing world. In the past, it was whoever had the strongest military. Now, you don't necessarily need the strongest military to do it. You just need to have the strongest information army and the willingness to do the dirty things that Western societies don't do anymore, but they used to.
I want to interrupt because I think there's an order of operations here that we're getting at that isn't clear. I would argue that ignorance starts the foundation for the polarization that is then capitalized on through this information warfare landscape. So I say that because I think it's important for us to understand that your statistics are relevant and correct. Those statistics don't come first, they come after. The ignorance kind of comes first. The willing blindness to what's happening in the world. The willingness to just focus in on what your tasks are or what entertains you and let the rest of the world kind of do whatever it's going to do. It's that choice first that then leads to other countries finding an opportunity to manipulate the masses that are no longer informed as to what's happening outside of their world. I don't want to speak for you, but that's kind of how CIA handles clandestine operations when it comes to information security operations, is understanding we're not trying to make an audience ignorant. We're finding an ignorant audience and then giving them messaging to get them to take action.
The difference is, so I would maintain, we've always been ignorant. The difference is now you can actually do something with that ignorance and manipulate it at scale that you couldn't before. So ignorance has always been with us, but before at least people knew where they could go to find what they perceived to be a trusted source. So now that source is gone. That messaging is gone.
That skill is gone.
I have a different take entirely, and I focus on narrative. So I'm really interested in who tells the story and who gets to control the story. And what I watch happening a lot is that the story is controlled for a while and then it gets hijacked over and it's someone else's story. So it's like the end of the spectrum of what you're both saying. And you have the agency working really hard to grab it back. You've got the White House saying, we need to get our stakeholder press, and it's this, so you're running essentially like a kinetic war, a proxy war, and an information war at the same time. And I think that the information is what drives most of this conflict, which is why it's so interesting to me to speak to diplomats, the only people not at this table, right, that are like, because then that's only where I see the hope of kind of like take it down, because there's an ease that needs to happen when you can move the people from trust to paranoia.
I love that you mentioned diplomacy and diplomats. So I teach courses on diplomacy, and one of the things I've seen emerge in the last few years is this dichotomy between private diplomacy, which is what we were used to when we studied the Cold War and post-Cold War conflicts, and now we have public diplomacy. Almost all diplomacy, take the Iran-Israel war, the 12-day war, as Trump calls it. How much of that war was conducted via social media? This is now, so you have this public-facing diplomacy where you have, during wartime, leaders, their representatives, their proxies, conveying messaging both to their enemies, to their allies, and to a supposedly neutral audience, all through social media, right? So it is not so much the nuclear age, but the age of the algorithm and how that amplifies diplomacy in a way that never, ever existed. And so this is, I think, this lends to that dilution that then others can take advantage of. Because at the end of the day, if you want to threaten a country or you want to garner support, how you articulate that via social media, whether you use all caps, whether you use images, memes, all of these things play into how effective that is. And you see that most on TikTok, and when, after the October 2023 Hamas attacks against Israel, the information warfare between the two sides and how it played out on college campuses. I was at a big one where a lot of that was taking place at UCLA, and how that played out on social media, and even among high school kids who I talk to, and their understanding of conflict is now shaped by what TikTok, which is partially controlled by the Chinese government, feeds them and chooses to feed them and amplify.